Today I will be going over 5 tips for learning and practicing piano scales. If you're a beginner or you've been playing the piano for a little while but haven't spent the time to learn your scales, this video is for you. Hi friends, my name is Josh and I am here on YouTube to share my love of music with you. If you have not watched my video yet on how piano scales are made, check that out here. So lots of the tips that I'm going to show you today are not just useful for piano scales, but can be applied to any tricky part in a song that you're learning. Also, there's mini tips sprinkled throughout this video, so be sure to watch from beginning to end. You don't want to miss anything. And I have a bonus tip at the end of this video. Let's get started. Tip number 1, focus on proper fingerings. A quick explanation for those who don't know. Every scale has a recommended fingering that you should use, or at least beginners should use when they play the scale. Of course, you don't have to use this exact fingering, but if you're beginning, it's probably a good place to start. To find the proper fingerings, just search the name of the scale you're trying to play and then piano fingerings on Google or something. In the future, I'm going to be creating a resource that you can download and look at every single fingering on every scale, but for now, just use Google. So these charts are going to have finger numberings, 1 through 5. In both of your hands, 1 is the thumb, 2 is the index finger, and so on until you get to 5, which is the pinky. It's easy to remember because 1 thumb, 1 thumb. It rhymes. Yay for rhymes. So remember, when you're practicing your scales, be sure to use the exact same fingerings every time. When you're practicing your C major scale, you want to play the first 3 notes with your first 3 fingers and then swing your thumb underneath every time. If you play 4 or 5 notes before swinging your thumb under, even if you play the scale perfectly, that's not going to help you grow because you're building inconsistent habits. Actually, you're not even building habits at all. You're hurting yourself more if you don't play it correctly every time. The key is being consistent with your fingerings every single time. Tip number 2, build up one scale note at a time. Learning a whole new scale can be overwhelming at first, but if you just spend time on a couple notes at a time, master those and then add another note, master those and add another, soon you'll learn the entire scale. For instance, if you're learning C major, just start with C and D. Work on those 2 notes and get them sounding exactly the same. Play them for the exact same length and play them with the exact same velocity so that they sound coherent. Once you spend some time making sure these 2 sound really good, then add the E. Spend some time practicing these first 3 notes of the C major scale. Don't move on until you're comfortable playing all 3 of these and you can play them consistently. The key is to make every note sound the same, both in how long you play it for and how hard you strike the key. You don't want any one note to stand out among the rest. Take your time and practice with purpose, not lazily. And don't add a note until you can consistently play each prior note. Then when you get to the crossover, you only have to focus on adding one new note, F. Which brings me to my next point. On to number 3, spend time on your crossovers. The trickiest part of any scale is when you have to move your hand. Either you're going to be bringing your thumb underneath your other fingers, or you're going to be bringing your other fingers over your thumb. Focus on getting this transition seamless. There shouldn't even be a difference between these notes where you're transitioning between hand positions and between any other notes in the scale. You want to play every note exactly the same. Sometimes when you bring your thumb under, you might play that first note with your thumb a lot louder or maybe a lot quieter if you kind of miss it. And that's just going to create inconsistency in your scales. Work on this. Practice the movement between this 3rd finger and your thumb on your C major scale. Spend some time working on bringing it under and playing the notes exactly the same. Also, anticipate movements. If you're playing your C major scale, when you're playing the first 3 notes, you should already be thinking about how your thumb has to come across and play the F. If you wait until you play the E before you bring your thumb under to play the F, you're going to be very rushed and you're probably not going to be able to play it very well. So immediately after playing that first C, you're going to want to start bringing it across. You want this transition to become smooth, like peanut butter. Man, a PB&J sounds good right now. Tip number 4. This is my favorite tip. Use a metronome. This is literally a game changer if you want to build speed and consistency in your scales, which who wouldn't? So a metronome is just a simple device that keeps a steady beat for you. You can find a metronome just by looking online, or you can even download a metronome app on your phone for free. This is like the one I use. It's called Pro Metronome, it looks like. Start out with a comfortable tempo, maybe 50 to 80 BPM, beats per minute. Focus on playing every note with consistency, right on the beat. Play the entire scale a few times at this tempo until you are able to do it perfectly multiple times in a row. And when I say perfect, I mean perfectly. If you are working at a certain tempo and you keep on stumbling, you keep on tripping up your fingers, you can't get the right fingerings every time, and you try to move to a faster tempo, that's just gonna hurt you. Please don't do that. You want to lock it in. Be able to play it 3 or 4 times in a row perfectly. After this, bump up the tempo. I'd say 5 to 10, maybe 15 BPM at a time. Then repeat it with your new tempo. Continue building up until you reach a speed where you can no longer play consistently. Remember, you don't want to go faster than you can. When you're beginning, consistency is more important than speed. Also, using this technique can help a lot when you're playing a tricky passage in a song. Start slow and slowly build up to the tempo. You won't even realize how much faster it's getting because you're building by such small increments every time. Mini tip: once you reach a high enough tempo, like 150 BPM or something, cut the tempo in half back down to 75, and instead of playing 1 note on every beat, now play 2 notes on every beat. So you're playing at the exact same speed. Once you get to a fast enough tempo playing 2 notes every beat, cut that in half again and play 4 notes on every beat. This will actually make it feel like you're playing slower than you actually are. If you're trying to play along with a metronome that's going 250 BPM, you're gonna feel so rushed and you're not gonna be able to play it well. Finally, tip number 5. Do not try to learn all the scales at once. There's 12 major scales, 12 minor scales, and those are just your natural minor scales. You have harmonic minor scales, melodic minor scales, pentatonic scales, chromatic scales. It can be so overwhelming for beginners. What I recommend is just focusing on 1 scale a week. If you're just starting, the easiest place to start is the C major scale because it only uses the white keys. Spend 10 minutes or so working on this scale every day, using your right hand, using your left hand, using both hands at the same time, and using these tips that we talked about to get these scales locked in. Now you might be saying, I don't need a week to practice the C major scale, it's so easy. Take the time to do it. By spending time practicing the C major scale, you're building up the techniques and working on the finger movements that you need to play other scales as well. If you practice 1 scale every week, by the time you get to the harder scales, you'll already have such a strong foundation that learning these scales will become much quicker than it would have been. By the end of the week of practicing a scale, you'll have become much better at it than you started, no matter what scale it is. And then you can move on to the next scale. Here's a good order to learn the scales in if you want to work through 1 every week. Lots of people want to be able to play all the scales right away, but take your time. There's no need to rush. The more you take your time on these things, the better habits you'll develop and the faster you'll be able to learn in the long run. 1 a week. Okay, I told you I had a bonus tip, so here we go. Don't waste your time replaying the scales you already know. As you learn a new scale each week, you might want to sit down at the piano and whip out all the scales you've mastered so far and practice them a lot again. But you already know these. Don't waste your time doing this. You need to spend the most time practicing the scales that you haven't learned yet. Of course, it's important to revisit scales and make sure you still know them, but you don't want to be there in the 10th week trying to learn your D flat major scale or something and then spend half your time just playing the C major scale flawlessly. That's great, but that's not going to help you. Not all songs are in C major. Spend your time practicing things that actually need practice. This also doesn't just apply to scales. When you're playing a song, don't just play the parts over and over again that you already know. Spend the most time playing the trickier parts, the harder runs, the things that really need some practice, because that is what's going to trip you up if you don't spend the time. Even if you've mastered 90% of the song, you want to spend most of your time focused on that last 10% that you don't know. That's how you're truly going to be able to play the song well. So keep that in mind as you learn the piano. So a quick summary of some of the main ideas: take your time, focus on consistency, practice every day. Now, music, like all art forms, is a combination of both technical expertise and creative expression. Obviously, this video is focused more on the technical side, but don't get so bogged down by these scales that you forget about the creative side. You should enjoy the music that you're playing. If you're not enjoying the music that you're playing, then why are you playing the piano? So every day, spend a few minutes practicing your scales, but then also play the songs that you love to play. I'm going to be making more videos on both the technical and the creative side of this, so please consider subscribing if you want to see those. Alright, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.